All right, good afternoon, guys. I hope you're having a great start to your week. We are on Unit 15, Session 2. Unit 15, Session 2. I hope you enjoyed the Book of Jonah this past week. Again, just a great story and just a book where again, I mentioned last week, is pretty familiar to our students, but also just to be able to cover it in one week, it's probably doesn't do it justice. But at the same time, you get to see a pretty cool picture of God teaching a lesson, right, to Jonah, even through Jonah's own hypocrisy and his arrogance, and interesting ending to Jonah is we're not 100% sure how uh, if he repents, if he finally learns his lesson. I'd like to think he does because of just, man, he wrote the book. So hopefully he did. But we're going to read a book or talk about a book today that's relevant to Jonah. Or at least the historical context of Jonah. We're in the book of Nahum today. All right. And so, book of Nahum, and the title of the lesson is God's Judgment of the Nations. So, God's Judgment of the Nations. And the main point is that all who seek refuge in Jesus will be saved. But this passage, I'm not going to lie to you, it's a little intense and it seems a little harsh. Just the way verses 1 through 6 appear. And so, but really, this book is really going to be about the judgment of Nineveh, this same country that 100 years earlier was spared the wrath of God. A lot's happened in that 100 years. About 50 years after Jonah's time there, or maybe even like closer to 40 years, they invaded the northern kingdom and overthrew it. And so Israel was under Assyrian captivity and an Assyrian empire, and Nineveh was their capital city. And so most people believe that Nahum, was just reading my study Bible this morning, was written somewhere between um, 664 and 612. That's a long period of time, but we know it was in the mid 6th century or mid 600s. And so, with that, we know that Assyria is going to be overthrown. They were overthrown in 612 by the Medes and the Babylonians. So, this promise of judgment, this promise of them being overthrown, was probably sometime, a few decades prior to that. So, we're thinking anywhere from 660 to 620, 615, something like that, was probably when this was written, nearly 100 years after Jonah was written. So quickly getting into your points, verses 1 through 6, the Lord will judge the guilty. The Lord will judge the guilty. Um, Assyria is a wicked nation. Babylon, or Nineveh in particular, the capital of Assyria, is wicked. Listen to some of the words that the Lord uses here to describe his wrath, um, or Nahum uses to describe his wrath. It says, he rebukes the sea and dries it up. He makes all the rivers run dry. Bashan and Carmel wither, and even the flower of Lebanon withers. The mountains quake before him, and the hills melt. The earth trembles at his presence, the world and all who live in it. Who can withstand his indignation? Who can endure his burning anger? His wrath is poured out like fire. Even rocks are shattered before him. And so you see all this language of intense and harsh judgment, because the God is pouring out his wrath on those who are unrighteous. And in the Old Testament, you have a lot of um, pouring out of God's wrath, but the full extent of his wrath we know hasn't been poured out until Christ comes. And he faced the full extent of Christ's wrath for not only the sins of a nation or the sins of a certain people, but for the sins of the entire world. And so this is even a foreshadowing to Nineveh bears this judgment in the Old Testament, but one day Christ will come and bear that entire judgment for the entirety of the world. And then, so after that verse, that was verse 6 that I ended on, where it ends, where it says, even the rocks are shattered before him. The very next verse says this: the Lord is good, a stronghold in a day of distress. He cares for those who take refuge in him, but he will completely destroy Nineveh with an overwhelming flood, and he will chase his enemies into darkness. You see there in verse 7 that the Lord will care for the humble. The Lord will care for the humble, the people that that trust in him. God will care for them. Within God's wrath and within this judgment, even within Israel's judgment that you see in the Old Testament. God always leaves a remnant. He doesn't completely destroy his people. And this is there to remind the readers of saying, although Nineveh is going to receive this great wrath, do not forget that the Lord is gracious and the Lord is good and he is righteous in all that he does. Because when you read that, you can say, oh my goodness, he's overreacting. He's just, he's this wrathful, mean God. And it's like, no, that's not it at all. He's just. And the Ninevites are getting what they deserve, and they probably should have gotten it, and they definitely should have gotten what they deserve a lot longer prior to then. And then we flip to chapter 3, verses 1-7, and we really just see this woe towards Nineveh. We see that there's really this no escape. No one's showing sympathy for Nineveh. Nineveh has been wicked. And that's really the point, is the Lord will oppose the wicked. And I read that, and I'm reminded, and I hope that you can just kind of go back to that and think on that this week as you're teaching. But one of the most difficult things I think that as a Christian that I struggle with sometimes when I look at our world is it feels like so much the wicked is and the people that are not righteous and the people that are doing wrong things and evil things, that they're exalted, that they're lifted up, that they're glorified by our society. And man, like that's hard, because we realize not that we want to be in ourselves, but we want good things to be exalted. We want the things of God to be exalted. And one day they will be, right? Because one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And so just remember as you're teaching this, that because Nahum can be a difficult book to teach, but don't forget about the contrast that's drawn here. This is not the people of God, right? They're facing the extent of God's wrath, and they deserve it. They're wicked. They're evil people. God's favor is not upon them. Even when we look at our world and we might say society's favor is on all these people that are wicked and evil, God's favor is not upon them. In many ways, God's just given them over to their sin, right? And so for us, our goal isn't to rejoice and say, oh yeah, you guys are going to die one day and you guys are going to be destroyed. That's not really what it is, because then we become like Jonah, right? We become like, you're going to get everything you deserve, woe to you, and you're going to be destroyed, all that. That's not our heart. But we know that's the reality, that one day if that sin continues and they never put their trust in Christ, they're going to face ultimate judgment, and that's eternity in hell. And so that doesn't give us, that doesn't cause us to rejoice in that. But that causes us to, I think, be concerned for their souls, right? Because knowing that one day they will get what they deserve. And the only reason we're not getting what we deserve is because Christ has shown his favor upon us and we've accepted his gift of salvation. So how much more do those people need that? So I know that was lengthy today, but I hope it helps you understand the book of Nahum and his message. Hope you guys have a great week.